James and Sarah had been married for 10 years, a decade filled with highs and lows, but ultimately built on what James believed was a solid foundation of trust. They had a beautiful suburban home, 2 kids who lit up their world, and a close circle of friends who felt more like family. Among those friends, none were closer to James than Ethan. Ethan had been James' best friend since college, his confidant, his brother in all but blood. Ethan was charming, adventurous, and always seemed to carry an air of effortless charisma. Sarah, of course, was fond of Ethan as well, but James had never thought much of it. They all spent so much time together that any small moments of warmth exchanged between Ethan and Sarah felt natural. It wasn't until one evening, long after the kids had gone to bed, that James began to sense something amiss. He had walked into the living room to find Sarah laughing a little too loudly at one of Ethan's jokes. Her hand lingered on his shoulder for just a moment too long. James dismissed the feeling at first. He trusted both of them implicitly, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to grow. The weeks that followed were a blur of subtle changes. Sarah seemed more distracted, her phone always within arm's reach. She started taking more me time, disappearing for hours with vague explanations. Ethan, too, became less present. Their usual banter during weekly game nights felt strained, his eye contact fleeting. Late one night, as Sarah slept beside him, James picked up her phone, feeling a pang of guilt even as he unlocked it. What he found shattered his world. Texts between Sarah and Ethan that left no room for misinterpretation. The words were intimate, laden with emotions and confessions that should have been reserved for a husband and wife. There were photos, inside jokes, and plans to meet in secret. James confronted Sarah the next day, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. At first, she denied everything, but as he laid the evidence before her, her defiance crumbled. She broke down, admitting that what had started as innocent friendship had spiraled into something she hadn't intended. Her excuses did little to soothe the betrayal. Ethan, when confronted, offered no apology. He claimed it was a mistake, but his nonchalant tone only deepened the wound. The friendship that James had cherished for so many years was destroyed in an instant. In the weeks that followed, James grappled with what to do. Should he fight for his marriage, try to rebuild what was broken, or should he walk away, knowing the trust that was once the cornerstone of their relationship had been irreparably shattered? One thing was certain. Life as he knew it would never be the same. James decided he needed space, not just from Sarah, but from everything that reminded him of the life they'd built together. He packed a bag and moved into a modest motel on the edge of town, leaving the home they had shared to Sarah and the kids. It broke his heart to be apart from his children, but he couldn't bear to see Sarah every day, to be haunted by her betrayal. At the motel, James struggled to make sense of everything. The nights were the hardest, with his mind replaying images of Sarah and Ethan together. He was consumed by anger and sadness, but most of all, he felt hollow. How could the 2 people he trusted most in the world have done this to him? Sarah reached out daily, begging for a chance to explain, to make things right. Her texts and calls alternated between desperate apologies and attempts to justify her actions. She claimed she still loved James, that her feelings for Ethan had been a mistake, a fleeting infatuation born out of loneliness and the monotony of their routine. But James couldn't reconcile her words with her actions. Ethan, on the other hand, had vanished from their lives entirely. He stopped responding to James's calls and texts, perhaps out of guilt or cowardice, leaving their decade-long friendship in ruins. After weeks of solitude, James agreed to meet with Sarah in a neutral setting, a small park where they often took their children on weekends. She looked different, her face marked by sleepless nights and tear-streaked confessions. She poured her heart out, apologizing over and over, acknowledging the pain she had caused. She begged for another chance, not just for her but for the family they had built. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "But I love you, James. I've always loved you. Please don't let this destroy everything we've worked so hard to build." James sat in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Part of him wanted to believe her, to forgive, and start anew for the sake of their children. But the image of Sarah with Ethan, the betrayal, was a wound that still bled. In the following weeks, James sought therapy, needing guidance to navigate his emotions. He learned that healing wouldn't come from bearing the pain, but from facing it head-on. He invited Sarah to join him in counseling, unsure if they could ever rebuild, but willing to try for the sake of their family. The process was grueling. They unpacked years of unspoken frustrations, unmet needs, and ignored signs. Slowly, James began to see that while Sarah's betrayal was inexcusable, their marriage had been struggling long before Ethan came into the picture. But forgiveness was not an easy road. There were days when James couldn't look at Sarah without feeling the sting of betrayal. Trust was a fragile thing, and it would take more than words to rebuild. He set firm boundaries, made it clear that Ethan could no longer be part of their lives, and asked Sarah to prove her commitment through her actions, not just her promises. Months turned into years, and while the scars of the past never fully disappeared, James and Sarah managed to carve out a new version of their relationship, one built on honesty and a determination to move forward. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was theirs, and that was enough for now. As for Ethan, he became a ghost of their past, a painful reminder of what they had endured and overcome. James mourned the loss of his best friend, but found solace in the knowledge that he had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and ready to face whatever the future held. Years passed, and life found a semblance of normalcy, though James and Sarah's marriage bore the scars of what had happened. Their relationship was no longer built on blind trust, but on an intentional, sometimes painstaking commitment to communication and transparency. Sarah worked hard to rebuild James's confidence in her, and James gradually allowed himself to believe in the possibility of moving forward. Still, the ghost of Ethan lingered in the unspoken. Though he had been completely cut out of their lives, his betrayal remained an emotional undercurrent that occasionally resurfaced during arguments or moments of doubt. James wrestled with the loss of what had been two of his most important relationships. He tried to forgive, not for Ethan's sake, but for his own peace of mind. Forgiveness, he learned, didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing the power of the past over his future. James also grew closer to his children during this time, pouring his energy into being the best father he could be. In the process, he found a source of healing. His kids had always been his priority, but now, every laugh and every milestone they achieved served as a reminder of why he had chosen to try to save his marriage. They gave him purpose, grounding him in moments when the weight of his emotions threatened to pull him under. Sarah, too, had changed. She carried guilt for what she'd done, but instead of letting it define her, she used it as a catalyst for growth. She became more attentive, more present, not just in her marriage, but as a mother and individual. She sought therapy on her own, confronting the reasons behind her choices and working to ensure she would never again jeopardize the family she loved. As time went on, the couple found themselves laughing together again, sharing quiet moments over coffee or reminiscing about happier times. Slowly but surely, they began creating new memories, ones that didn't carry the shadow of betrayal. Their love was no longer naive, no longer rooted in the illusion that things would always be perfect. Instead, it became something raw and real, forged in the fire of their shared pain and resilience. One evening, years after the affair, James and Sarah sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset as their kids played in the yard. James turned to Sarah and said, "I never thought we'd get here." Sarah looked at him, her eyes soft and full of emotion. "Neither did I, but I'm so glad we did." In that moment, James felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. The road had been long and filled with detours, but they had made it. While their journey was far from over, they had found a way to move forward together. For James, it was a reminder that while some wounds may never fully heal, they don't have to define the rest of the story. As the years stretched onward, James and Sarah leaned into their newfound connection. Though their marriage had been tested in ways neither had anticipated, the lessons they learned became the foundation for a deeper understanding of one another. Yet, life has a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. One summer afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, James came across a photo album filled with memories from the early days of his friendship with Ethan. The pictures showed laughter, shared adventures, and milestones that felt like a lifetime ago. Seeing Ethan's face brought back a mix of emotions: anger, nostalgia, and a lingering sense of loss. It was a chapter of his life that had been abruptly closed, but not without leaving an indelible mark. James shared the discovery with Sarah later that evening. They sat together on the couch, flipping through the album in silence. Finally, James spoke. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I do," she admitted. "Not in the way you might think, though. It's more regret. Regret for what we allowed to happen and for how much damage it caused. I think about how different things could have been if we'd all handled things better." James appreciated her honesty. It was a reminder that even though they had moved forward, the past wasn't something they could erase. It was part of their story, woven into the fabric of who they had become. In the following months, James began exploring a new perspective, what it meant to truly forgive, even without reconciliation. He attended a local support group for people who had experienced betrayal, finding solace in hearing the stories of others who had faced similar struggles. Through these sessions, he began to see forgiveness as an act of liberation, not for Ethan or Sarah, but for himself. One evening, James made a decision he hadn't thought possible. He wrote Ethan a letter, not to rekindle their friendship, but to finally say the things he had been carrying in his heart. In the letter, he expressed his pain, anger, and disappointment, but also his journey toward understanding. He didn't absolve Ethan of responsibility, but acknowledged that holding on to resentment had been a weight he no longer wanted to bear. He ended the letter by wishing Ethan well, a gesture of closure for himself more than anything else. James never sent the letter. Instead, he tucked it away in a drawer, feeling a sense of relief simply from putting his thoughts into words. For the first time in years, he felt as though he had taken back control of his narrative. As life moved forward, James and Sarah continued to build on their renewed partnership. They celebrated anniversaries with quiet gratitude, not for perfection of their marriage, but for their resilience. Their children grew older, their laughter and achievements becoming a testament to the strength of the family they had fought to preserve. By the time their youngest graduated high school, James and Sarah stood side by side, watching with pride. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes of hardships weathered, battles fought, and the enduring bond they had managed to salvage. In the end, James realized that his journey wasn't about erasing the pain of the past, but learning to coexist with it. The betrayal had shaped him, changed him, but it didn't define him. What defined him was his ability to choose love, even when it wasn't easy, and to rebuild, even when the odds seemed impossible. And in that, James found something he never thought he would again: peace.